Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And I just wanted to begin because a lot of people also asked during the exhibition what was the why we set this up and why celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. today. So I just wanted to begin by talking a little bit about why we decided to do this celebration in a few minutes. And because we have been asked several times why celebrate King and what is the relevance of King for our society and our times. And I feel that somebody could have asked Martin Luther King Jr. the same question as he was serving as a pastor in the small town of Montgomery, Alabama. Why was he interested in India and Gandhi? What could have been the relevance of Ahimsa and Satyagraha to the Afro-American people? And I think this connection produced one of the greatest events of the 20th century, the fact that the civil rights movement in America adopted and advanced the methods and ideas of the Indian freedom struggle. I think King's struggle is one of the most beautiful tributes to the Indian freedom struggle. It is a reflection of the international nature of our struggle that we have forgotten. And that is what we wanted to remember today. I think so many Indians have gone to America, they have relatives in the US who are familiar with the country. But which America do we associate with? There's the America in its suburbs, in its elite universities, in its business opportunities, in TV shows, and in Hollywood. And yet, as King reminded us, there is another America. Quote, this other America has a daily ugliness about it that constantly transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair, end quote. This other America has poverty and dirt on the streets, the opioid epidemic, the deserted cities, the languishing schools, the gun violence and despair. Martin Luther King Jr. is the voice of that other America. It is a voice of struggle, it's a voice of hope, and humanity must learn from it. I think King teaches us to see the majority of people as makers of history. He teaches us that a civilization that cannot establish itself in moral and spiritual needs perishes. He teaches us that our consumerist society needs a radical revolution of values, as he said. He teaches us that we must fight for a beloved community, that love is a creative and redemptive force. He teaches us that we are all tied together in a single garment of destiny, the title that we chose to give this event. And whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. Finally, King teaches us that our political choices are also moral choices. Quote, there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because one's conscience tells one that it is right, end quote. He teaches us that we cannot wait to do the right thing. There is a fierce urgency of now in his words. I think he is a philosopher and thinker of the highest quality, and we believe that he must be studied. His philosophy and thought reminds us so much of our own tradition. The Upanishads say, the wise man beholds all beings in the self and the self in all beings. And so we see ourselves in Martin Luther King Jr. We believe his thinking and practice belongs not just to Afro-America, but it belongs to humanity as a whole. We live today in a world that continues to be plagued by war. The West has escalated tensions in various parts of the world, in Ukraine, China, and Korea, for example, and purportedly for the fight of democracy against authoritarianism. Martin Luther King Jr. never accepted this Cold War rhetoric. He said, quote, don't let anybody make you think God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. Today, Western democracy and American society are in a deep crisis. Some have compared it to a civil war and others have called it a pre-revolutionary situation. We in India must understand these changes and understand the world to take our place in it. Today we have a generation of Indians who are familiar with the West but do not aspire to be Western. They respect our traditions and yet are faced with a modern world. Martin Luther King Jr. serves as a model for these young people. In studying King, we seek to understand the West so we may understand what ails it, and yet we may learn from what is best in it, which is the tradition he represented. In studying King, we have a new way to understand our own freedom struggle. Today, we celebrate King as a great soul, and in celebrating him, we also celebrate Mahatma Gandhi and our own freedom struggle from which there is so much to learn for our times. Thank you. So I'll now turn it over to Arakali Venkatesh, the Honorable Secretary of the IIWC, to begin the formal welcome of the program.
Good evening, everyone. Today is an auspicious and exciting day auspicious because sun is entering into Capricorn today and bringing with it the end of winter and dawning the harvest season. So on that count, I want to wish all of you a very happy Makara Sankranti or Pongal, what it is called. So thank you again for making time to be with us. And as most of you are aware, Dr. Martin Luther King visited this institute on 26th February 1959, over 50 years back. And from this very podium, he delivered a lecture here. So that's the connect what Indian Institute of World Culture has closely with Dr. King and his civil rights movement of the black Americans in America. So I'm extremely again happy that we have organized a photo exhibition which was inaugurated by Ambassador Nazareth, Sri K.G. Raghavan sir, Udupi Krishna sir, so and others. So thank them all once again on this occasion and for having taken time to come here and be part of this particular event, which is going to be there for the next 10 days. And as is customary, today's lecture is being delivered by Dr. Ambassador Nazareth, and it is in memory of two distinguished personalities, Sri K.P. Rao and Sir M.N. Krishna Rao. So I would like to start the lecture by having or invite Ambassador Nazareth. Before that, I would like to provide a brief introduction of the two personalities in whose memories this King's lecture has been organized today. Sir M.N. Krishna Rao Memorial Program. Rajakarya Prasakta Diwan Bahadur Sir M.N. Krishna Rao was born in 1877 in Mysore. Sir Krishna Rao, after passing his degree, took up the civil service examination and was appointed as the finance probation in 1897. In 1919, he became the first council member and later as the acting Diwan of Mysore during 30-32. His contributions to the state are remarkable. His skillful management of financial resources and distinguished service was appreciated, and it impressed the Maharaja, and who awarded him the Rajakarya Prasakta title in 1922 and the Diwan Bahadur title in 1925. The acting governor of India at that time recognized his blemishless meritorious service and awarded him the knighthood, the Sir title in 1934. Sir Krishna Rao, with his shrewd genius and financial management skill, brought about two bonds even at that time, and it was a big success which helped in financing the Krishnaraja Sagar Dam and setting up the Bhadravati iron ore. He refused to take salary during his entire tenure. After retirement from service, he donated a royal sum of 20,000 rupees to develop the park, which is named after him, which is just opposite to the institute, Indian Institute of World Culture's opposite to that there is a 5-acre park. So it is in his memory this park was started, and he also provided an additional sum of 15,000 rupees to construct the pavilion, establishing a radio receiver and also equipping the children play home. Sir M.N. Krishna Rao passed away in 1958. This endowment has been instituted by his grandson M.R. Narendra since 2011. So I thank the family of Sir M.N. Krishna Rao for instituting this memorial lecture, and I welcome them on behalf of this crowd here. So thank you. And we also have one more endowment program in the name of Sri K.P. Rao. K.P. Rao was born in 1927. After receiving his law degree, he practiced law for 54 years in various courts, even the High Court of Karnataka. He started the first news agency in Kannada by the name Rao's Press Features as early as 1950s. He was a pioneer in reporting the judicial proceedings to all leading dailies like Deccan Herald, Prajavani, Kannada Prabha, Hindu, and Samyukta Karnataka at that time. Very popular series like You Be the Judge appeared in Deccan Herald for a very long time. An advisor to Bangalore Press, he started the popular Vakila Darshini in Bangalore Press Calendar. He was the founder of Karnataka Law Journal, editor of Bangalore Law Journal, and Kanun Mitra. He pioneered in consumer movement, and he was instrumental in establishment of consumer forums in Karnataka. He was recognized for his service in journalism by UNESCO World Press, Infra, and Times of India yearbook. Aryabhatta Award in 2007 for his legal service, honored during the Golden Jubilee of the High Court of Karnataka, honored by Gayan Samaja, Karnataka Lekakara Sangha, and others. This endowment has been instituted by Srimati Prabha Murthy and their family, and we have Mr. Murthy with us during this function, so I thank him for making time, and also thank the family for instituting this memorial lecture again. So thanks on behalf of Indian Institute of World Culture. And I now request Dr. Nandita to take it over from here.
Okay, so without any more delay, I'll just introduce our speaker for today, who is Ambassador Nazareth. Ambassador Nazareth holds a master's degree in economics from Madras University. He's had a 35-year IFS career, starting in '59, and he served in India's diplomatic missions in Tokyo, Rangoon, New York, London, Lima, and also as India's High Commissioner to Ghana and as Ambassador to Egypt and Mexico. He retired in May '94, and since then he has lectured at many universities within India and also abroad. Within India, and universities such as the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore, Benares Hindu University, and abroad universities such as Stanford, Yale, Columbia, Peking University. His Gandhi's Outstanding Leadership book, published in March 2006, has come out in 12 Indian and 23 world languages. And in 2007, he was presented the U Thant Peace Award for his lifetime of world service, whose previous recipients include Nelson Mandela. In October of 2012 and 2017, he delivered the keynote address at the International Day of Nonviolence events at the United Nations in New York and the United Nations Library in Geneva. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome and thank Ambassador Nazareth and invite him to give his lecture.
That's fine, the slides is good enough, but someone is going to help me with the slides.
Yeah, so when you say next slide, then change.
Okay, so I've already indicated the various spots at which these things should come in. Okay.
Is this slide enough for you?
I'm fine.
Are you comfortable?
Yeah, I'm comfortable, thank you.
Yes. Why not? We also shift there so we can see this.
Yeah, good idea, yes. Dr. Satyavati, President of the Indian Institute of World Culture, Mr. K.G. Raghavan, Chairman of the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Dr. Vode P. Krishna, Chairman of the Gandhi Smarak Nidhi, and dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm greatly honored to have been invited to deliver this lecture. The title of my talk is Martin Luther King, Gandhi's most outstanding and renowned disciple. Martin Luther King was certainly Gandhi's most outstanding and renowned disciple, but not the first African American to be won over by Gandhian Satyagraha. Dr. William Du Bois had learnt about it from John Haynes Holmes, his colleague in the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. In 1929, he wrote to Gandhi requesting a message to American Negroes. Gandhi obliged and wrote, "Let not the 12 million Negroes be ashamed about the fact that they are grandchildren of slaves. There is dishonor in being slave owners, not slaves. But let us not think of honor or dishonor in connection with the past. Let us realize that the future is with those who would be pure, truthful, and loving. For as the old wise men have said, truth ever is, untruth never was. Love alone binds, and truth and love accrue only to the truly humble." Martin Luther King was won over to Gandhian Satyagraha after hearing Dr. Mordecai Johnson, president of Harvard University, speak about it at Fellowship House in Philadelphia, soon after his return from his 1950 visit to India. King, then a student at Crozer Theological Seminary, was so impacted by this talk that he has written in one of his books. This talk was so profound and electrifying that I left the meeting and bought a half a dozen books on Gandhi's life and works. Now, can someone show the slide number 1 and 2?
Sorry, the power went, so it's okay.
Will it come before the end of this talk? Yeah, no, the first one should be on William Du Bois. Yeah, okay. Next one. Yeah, this is the Crozer Theological Seminary where Martin Luther King had done his theological studies. Now, it was the Montgomery bus boycott triggered on December the 1st, 1955 by Rosa Parks, an Afro-American seamstress and secretary of the Montgomery chapter of NAACP, which is the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, refusing to give up a seat on a city bus to a white man, which she was legally required to do, that brought Martin Luther King into the nonviolent struggle against racial discrimination. He was then the newly ordained pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. When Rosa Parks was charged with disorderly conduct and fined $14, the Montgomery African American community decided on a boycott of their city buses and requested Martin Luther King to lead it. I'll hereafter be referring to him only as King. Now, it was an amazing bus boycott. Since this was declared, the blacks, in many cases, had to walk 5 to 6 miles every day to and from their place of work, and yet they did this. And this, under Martin Luther King's inspiring leadership, this boycott went on for 381 days and ended only when the US Supreme Court ruled on December the 16th, 1956, that segregated seating on public buses in all parts of the country was unconstitutional. Now, can we see? Yeah, that is Rosa Parks. Next one. This is his visit to India. Okay. Yeah, okay, all right. In 1959, King visited India to meet and learn about from Gandhi's disciples how nonviolent struggle is waged. On his return, he wrote, "I left India more convinced than ever before that nonviolent resistance is the most potent weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for justice and dignity." In a real sense, Mahatma Gandhi embodied in his life certain universal principles that are inherent in the moral structure of the universe, and these principles are as inescapable as the law of gravitation. Now, on his return from India, King adopted Gandhi's Padayatra strategy, and in the next 9 years undertook what we call foot marches the numerous foot marches, the best known of which are to Birmingham, Selma, Washington, and Memphis. On the first mentioned march, he was arrested and imprisoned. His letter from a Birmingham jail has been described as one of the most important historical documents penned by a modern political prisoner, and became an important text of the US civil rights movement. Its most notable sentences are the following: I am in Birmingham because there is injustice here. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of destiny. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow provincial outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives in the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. Now, one might ask, what is the difference between a law that is just and unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the law of God. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages human personality. There is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians, who were willing to face hungry lions rather than submit to unjust laws of the Roman Empire. We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did was illegal. For years now, I have heard the word wait. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving speedily towards political independence, but we still creep at horse and buggy pace towards gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Abraham Lincoln had declared, "This nation cannot survive half slave and half free." So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? For the preservation of injustice or the extension of justice? Before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before the pen of Jefferson etched the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence, we were here. For more than 2 centuries, our forebears labored in this country without wages. They made cotton king. They built the houses of their masters while suffering shameful humiliation. If the inexpressible cruelties of slavery could not stop us, the opposition we face today will surely fail. We will win our freedom because the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of God are embodied in our echoing demands. Just see the great and inspirational rhetoric. Actually, when it comes to rhetoric, he's far, far superior to Gandhi. Gandhi, of course, was in a country which was so little educated, so he had to use very simple language to reach his people. So Martin Luther King has made a very great contribution in the propagation of nonviolence, the power of nonviolence, even more than Gandhi. Now, he delivered his historic "I Have a Dream" speech from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. on August 28, 1963, when he arrived in Washington after his long march for justice and freedom. In a 1999 his audience on this occasion was approximately 250,000 civil rights supporters. In a public poll of public address scholars, this speech was ranked the top American speech of the 20th century. The most memorable sentences of the speech are, 50 years ago, a great American signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared with a withering injustice. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. His life is still crippled by the manacles of segregation and discrimination. So we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to be heir. This note was a promise that all men, black as well as white, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as the citizens of color are concerned. We have come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. Now is the time to rise from the desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. There will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. But I say to my people, let us not satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of hatred. Again and again we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. I must point out here that the word satyagraha obviously wouldn't be understood by the American people and his audiences. So he used the word soul force quite often, and this is it appears here, but he has also used it in other in other of his speeches. The marvelous new militancy which has energized the Negro must not lead us to hate the white people, for many of them are here with us today and have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny, that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. My friends, I say to you, even though we face the difficulties of today, I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing, land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. On July 24, 1964, the Civil Rights Act was signed by President Lyndon Johnson, at which King and other civil rights leaders were present. On December the 10th, 1964, King was awarded the Nobel Prize. So 1964 definitely was the high point of King's career and his most triumphal year. Now, in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, he stated, I accept the Nobel Prize for peace at a moment when 22 million Negroes of the United States of America are engaged in a creative battle to end the long night of racial injustice. I accept this award on behalf of the civil rights movement, which is moving with determination and a majestic scorn for risk and danger to establish a reign of freedom and a rule of justice. This prize is a profound recognition that non-violence is the answer to the crucial political and moral questions of our time. The need for man to overcome oppression and violence without resorting to violence and oppression. Civilization and violence are antithetical concepts. Negroes of the United States, following the people of India, have demonstrated that nonviolence is not sterile passivity, but a powerful moral force which makes for social transformation. Sooner or later, all the people of the world will have to discover a way to live together in peace and thereby transform the spending cosmic elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. If this is to be achieved, man must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. Some months later, he described how nonviolent struggle had transformed his fellow Negroes in the following words. When legal contests were the sole form of activity, the ordinary Negro was involved only as a passive spectator. His interest was stirred, but his energies were unemployed. Mass marches transformed the common man into the star performer he became. The Negro was no longer a subject of change. He was the active organ of change. The dignity his job denied him, he obtained in political and social action. With his intrepid marches and inspiring letters and speeches, King brought about more beneficial change for his fellow Americans with his 12 years of nonviolent struggle than had come to them in the 100 years after the Civil War. Incidentally, not many people know that America has lost more people in that Civil War than in the two world wars put together. Now, this is the change, the beneficial change it brought about was well articulated by President Barack Obama in his inaugural address on January 20th, 2009, when he stated, "This is the source of our confidence, the knowledge that God calls on us to shape an uncertain destiny. This is the meaning of our liberty and our creed, why men and women of every race and faith can join on this magnificent mall, can join in celebration on this magnificent mall, and why a man whose father, less than 60 years ago, would not have been served in a local restaurant, can now stand before you to take the most sacred vow." King was assassinated while standing with his close associates Ralph Abernathy and Jesse Jackson on the balcony of the Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee on April the 4th, 1968. That is the commemorative plaque just below the room where he was assassinated. He had arrived there on April the 3rd to support the strike of its black sanitation workers who were being paid less than their white counterparts, and that evening had delivered his last and prophetic speech in which he stated, "We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop and seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." His 4-mile, 200,000 mourner funeral procession and funeral ceremony was attended by many US and foreign VIPs. It took place at Atlanta on April the 9th, 1968. To highlight his close connection with his disadvantaged fellow Negroes, his hearse was carried in a mule-drawn wagon. King had first voiced his opposition to the Vietnam War during his Selma to Montgomery march. He had then stated, "Millions of dollars are being spent every day on troops in South Vietnam, and yet our country cannot protect the rights of Negroes in Selma." From 1966 onwards, he began to voice his opposition to it more directly and often. Speaking to an approximately 300,000 member audience, 3,000 member audience at the Riverside Church in New York, he urged that American power should be harnessed in the service of peace and human beings, not unleashed against defenseless people. He also urged a radical revolution of values with emphasis on love and justice. He subsequently delivered similar speeches in Los Angeles and Chicago. His battle for civil rights for the blacks had made him hated by whites in the US South. His opposition to the Vietnam War made him hateful also to the American deep state, that is the FBI and CIA. Though both strove to establish that James Earl Ray was the lone assassin, the US House Select Committee on Associations that investigated this crime in 1979 concluded that there was likelihood of a conspiracy in the assassination of King, and that Ray was a scapegoat. And the fact that this was true was admitted by James Earl Ray's own brother, who admitted and confessed to on this committee that he knew that there was a very considerable amount of money that had been paid to his brother, and that he never undertook any work unless he was very well paid for it. Now, soon after the report of the Congressional Committee was released, Coretta King stated, "There is abundant evidence of a major, high-level conspiracy in the assassination of my husband." At this particular time, the Vietnam War was going badly for the US, and this was the last moment. This was not at all the moment when they wanted anyone, particularly within the US, to be openly criticizing it. So by stating what he had, King sadly had signed his own death warrant. 43 years later, the Stone of Hope National Memorial to him was inaugurated by President Obama on August 21st, 2011. It is located at 164 Independence Avenue on a sight line linking the Lincoln Memorial to the Jefferson Memorial. Its 1964 Independence Avenue address commemorates the Civil Rights Act of 1964. His design was inspired by King's "I Have a Dream" speech, in which he had averred, "Out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope will emerge." For King, Mahatma Gandhi was the first person in human history to lift the ethic of love of Jesus Christ above mere interaction between individuals and make it a powerful and effective social force on a large scale. If humanity is to progress, Gandhi is inescapable. We may ignore him at our own peril. When an American churchman criticized him for this, he replied, "It is ironic, yet inescapably true, that the greatest Christian of the modern world was a man who never embraced Christianity." The renowned Gandhian scholar Gene Sharp has described Gandhi and Martin Luther King as the two giants of the nonviolent struggle, and written about them thus: "In the 20th century, the practice of nonviolence is most widely associated with these two outstanding figures. Gandhi led what was essentially a liberation movement to expel the British from India through nonviolent resistance, while also using nonviolent techniques to address structural violence, the violence caused by poverty. Poverty, colonialism, and caste. King used nonviolent struggle as a form of social protest and reform and mobilization for legal reforms. He then continues, both Gandhi and King defy simplistic characterization. They arose from different cultures, religions, and epochs, yet they both believed that nonviolent approaches can be adopted by anyone with the will and determination for positive social change. Both believed in nonviolence as a universal principle and a transcendental value. Yet they knew that many of their adherents had previously used violence. Although they are often described as visionary, they were actually intensely practical. Nonviolent struggle was for both of them a means of transforming relationships and creating peaceful transitions of power. In fact, one of Gandhi's favorite quotations is that nonviolent struggle is not a program for seizure of power. It is an effort to bring about a transformation of relationship. And you see this in the case of India's independence. India had fought Britain in their non-violent struggle for many, many years, and yet they parted as friends. And today, and since independence, we have had a very close and friendly relationship with Britain, unlike in the case of a lot of the former French and Portuguese colonies. Non-violent struggle was for both of them means of transforming relations, creating peaceful transition to power. Both led by example, preaching and living the principles of tolerance and dialogue. Neither sought sainthood or martyrdom, but both fell to assassin's bullet. Both were the greatest contributors to the 20th century and progenitors of the 21st. The 20th century was the most blood-stained in human history, particularly in its first half, during which almost 100 people, mostly civilians, were killed in 2 world wars, Hitler's gas chambers, atom bomb drops on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Korean, Vietnam, Arab, Israel, India, Pakistan wars, and national liberation struggles in Asia and Africa. It was also its most revolutionary one. In its first half, fascist revolutions occurred in Italy, Germany, and Spain, and Marxist revolution in Russia and China. All of them were replete with violence, in keeping with the Marxist maxim, violence is the midwife of all old societies pregnant with new life. Remarkably, its second half witnessed not violent, but many non-violent revolutions in countries as far apart as India, Philippines, Poland, and Chile. Each of them have their own local names, but are now generally referred to as velvet revolutions. Roger Markwick has written a book about them titled From Violence to Velvet, A Century of Revolutions, 1917 to 2017. The 6-part Force More Powerful film series, produced by York Zimmerman and WETA, W-E-T-A, Washington, in the mid-1990s for the US Broadcasting Service, present impactful actual footages and interviews with their non-violent warriors. All the 6 films begin with a 2-minute focus on Gandhi in a South African jail in 1907. The narrative in all of them is by Ben Kingsley and concludes with him averring, the power that Gandhi discovered changed the 20th century. All these 6 films are accessible on YouTube and are of only 30-minute duration. I had urged Archiman to show one of these films. That was the most impactful for me of all these films is South Africa, because the situation in South Africa was almost as bad as it was in the US. And yet, through nonviolent struggle, the way they brought about change. And actually, Nelson Mandela, sadly, having tried nonviolence initially, decided that it wouldn't work in South Africa. So he took to violence, though he made sure, of course, as he has pointed out, he made sure that there would be minimum loss of human lives. So the violence was directed against infrastructure, blowing up bridges, blowing up trains, blowing up electric stations, etc. But actually, as the film points out with the interviews, particularly by their chief of their military intelligence, to say the violence actually ultimately came to nothing. We could have dealt with it. What really brought about change was the non-violent resistance, because when you have a whole lot of non-violent resistance, you can't shoot all of them. they changed the rules of the game. And the non-violent struggle was led mainly by a man called Luthuli and later by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and this is very well brought out in this film. I wish you all would. They're all available also on YouTube. Now, it is pertinent to recall here briefly the revolutionary changes and the world which soul force struggle have brought about in the last 100 years, mainly in the last 50 years. India was transformed from a highly feudal, women-suppressed, caste, poverty, hunger, and disease-plagued British colony into a constitutional democracy based on universal adult franchise, and is now a highly industrialized, technologically advanced country. In its 75 years of independence, it has had an untouchable, 2 Muslim and 2 women presidents, a woman and Sikh prime minister, and many women and minority community chief ministers in its 25 states. The US and South Africa have had their first black presidents. Sri Lanka, Philippines, and Chile, their first women presidents. And Bolivia, its first indigenous Aymara president. Over 100 former colonies, comprising 2/3 of world population and 3/4 of its land area, have gained independence. All East European communist dictatorships have ended. The Berlin Wall brought down. Germany reunified. The Soviet Union dissolved, and democratic regimes established in most of its former states, many of which have joined the European Union. Almost all these radical changes have been brought about through soul force struggles. They are the most sweeping democratization of national politics and international political geography in history. It is because Gandhi's ideology and his practice were deeply anchored in what he described as that indefinable, mysterious power that pervades everything. And in putting one's whole soul against the will of the tyrant, and unlike all other 20th century revolutions which were tethered to hate and violence, these revolutions were totally rooted in love and non-violence, that I titled and subtitled my second book on Gandhi as Gandhi, the Soul Force Warrior, who revolutionized revolution and spiritualized it. The great pertinence of Gandhi and King to India and the world, even today and hereafter, is because they embodied in themselves the soul force ideology and practice which are firmly tethered to truth, love, and non-violence, deep faith in the Almighty, and Satyam Evam Jayate, truth always triumphs. Martin Luther King has rightly averred, as I have already pointed out earlier, non-violent resistance is the most potent weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for justice and human dignity. In a real sense, Mahatma Gandhi embodied in his life certain universal principles that are inherent in the moral structure of the universe, and these principles are as inescapable as the law of gravitation. Before I end, I must also comment and point out that I never imagined that in my lifetime I would see in India that Gandhi would be described as a Deshdrohi and his assassin would be described as a Deshbhakt. That is the great tragedy, I believe, for India. But ultimately, truth will prevail. We are in a difficult situation in India today. There is a talk of a new India. But the India of Gandhi is the India of the millennia, thousands of years, and it's rooted in 2 basic maxims. Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti and Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That is the soul of India. And I believe whatever efforts are made to build a new India based on the supremacy of a single community is not going to succeed. Because at the heart of India is Hinduism. not the distorted, politicized the version of it called Hindutva. And we must all hope and pray, and I believe we all have a duty in some way to stand up for the truth, to stand up for India's millennium ideals, because they have been an inspiration to the world and will be for many years to come. I thank you for your attention. Yeah, before I sit down, I must say I brought my 2 books on Gandhi, and I will present them to the president of the Indian Institute of World Culture. Please add this to your library. Incidentally, the foreword to the first book, this particular version, has been written by the former Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev, and the foreword for the second has been written by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Thank you. This is my Gandhi's Outstanding Leadership, and this is Gandhi, the Soulful Soul.
Okay, I'd like to thank Ambassador Nazareth for his wonderful lecture and also his exhaustive commentary on the history of the civil rights movement. And many of the aspects he covered, I think, really need discussion, especially the world aspects of what he covered. The Soviet Union, how nonviolent revolution interacts with politics. And I think, hopefully we can continue this discussion over our break. We would have liked to entertain some questions, but we're out of time. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and then after that, we are going to screen this wonderful movie called King in the Wilderness, which covers the last years of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life. It's all the time that he was opposed to the war in Vietnam and was running the Poor People's Campaign and so on. So please do come back at 6:30 for the movie. But before I end, yes. Oh, there are also refreshments outside for the 15-minute break before you come back for the film. So I'd just like to thank all of you for coming, and I'd especially like to thank all those who inaugurated our exhibit today, including K.G. Raghavan, Dr. Satyavati, Vode Krishna, and I would also like to thank Ambassador Nazareth's wife, Isabel Nazareth, for attending today. And again, thank you, Ambassador Nazareth.
I'm leaving now.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, we come back at 6:30.